and Ranke had just handed Hitler the chemical weapon that would power the Blitzkrieg. September 1939. Poland. The invasion began, and with it, the first real military test of Pervitin in combat. German soldiers of the 3rd Tank Division had already received doses during the occupation of Czechoslovakia in 1938, but Poland was different. This was total war. Medical officers observed the effects carefully. Reports came flooding back to Ranke. The results were promising. Combativeness increased. Perseverance skyrocketed. The urge to win intensified. Soldiers could march for extended periods without succumbing to fatigue. They stayed alert through days and nights of combat. 100,000 Polish soldiers were killed in the attack. Germany overran its eastern neighbor by October, but this was just the beginning. The real test was coming. France. In the spring of 1940, as Hitler prepared to invade Western Europe, a decision was made that was without precedent in the history of war. In April 1940, the German High Command issued the Stimulant Decree. The official military order was distributed to medical personnel across the Wehrmacht. It stated that the experience of the Polish campaign had shown that in certain situations, military success was crucially influenced by overcoming fatigue in troops, on which strong demands had been made. Pervitin, the decree explained, has been methodically included in medical equipment. The recommended dosage was 1 tablet per day and 2 at night, with each tablet lasting up to 12 hours. The pills were to be taken only as needed to maintain sleeplessness. This was it. Germany was now the first army in the history of warfare to officially rely on a chemical drug. Between April and July 1940, more than 35 million tablets of Pervitin and Isofon, a slightly modified version, were manufactured and shipped to 3 million German soldiers, sailors, and pilots. Some packages were sent to Wehrmacht medical divisions under the codename OBM, then distributed directly to the troops. The packages were labeled stimulant. Rush orders could be placed by telephone if a shipment was urgently needed. At the Temmler factory, production revved into overdrive, pressing as many as 833,000 tablets per day. The pills came in rolls of 30 tablets, each containing 3 milligrams of methamphetamine. Soldiers gave them nicknames. The Luftwaffe called them Stuka tablets, after the dive bombers. They called them Hermann Göring pills, after the commander of the Air Force. They called them Flieger Schokolade, Flyer's chocolate, and Flieger Marzipan, Airman's marzipan. The tank crews called them Panzer Schokolade, tank chocolate. And then came the invasion of France, May 10, 1940. The German attack on Western Europe began. The plan was audacious. German forces would push through the Ardennes forest, a dense, hilly woodland that the French considered impassable for tanks. The French had placed their faith in the Maginot Line, a supposedly impenetrable series of fortifications along the German border. But the Germans were going around it. The weak link in the Blitzkrieg strategy was the human element. Soldiers, unlike machines, suffered from fatigue. They needed rest. They needed sleep. That's where Pervitin came in. Medical historian Peter Steinkamp would later put it perfectly when he said Blitzkrieg was guided by methamphetamine, if not to say that Blitzkrieg was founded on methamphetamine. Part of the speed of the Blitzkrieg literally came from speed. General Heinz Guderian, the expert in tank warfare who led the invasion, gave an order that should have been impossible. He demanded that his troops go sleepless for at least 3 nights if necessary, and they did. High on crystal meth, German tank and artillery drivers covered ground day and night, almost without stopping. They marched an average of 22 miles per day for 10 consecutive days. The Ardennes, which the French thought would take weeks to cross if it could be crossed at all, was penetrated in a matter of days. German tanks covered 240 miles of challenging terrain in 11 days. On May 10th, it took German forces only 3 hours to cover the 30 miles from Luxembourg's eastern border to Belgium's southeastern border. By May 14th, 3 key bridgeheads were established at Dinant, Monthermé, and Sedan. The French defensive lines shattered. The supposedly impenetrable Ardennes had been breached. The British and French armies, which had rushed into Belgium to meet what they thought was the main German attack, suddenly found themselves cut off. German forces were behind them. The speed was incomprehensible. French commanders couldn't believe the intelligence reports. 25 to 50 miles a day? Impossible, but it was happening. The French generals were still relying on couriers to deliver battlefield reports. Their commander-in-chief, General Gamelin, didn't even have a telephone in his headquarters in Paris. They were fighting a World War I battle in a World War II reality. And the Germans were operating on a different plane of existence entirely. British newspapers began reporting on German paratroopers who appeared heavily drugged, fearless, and berserk. The reports were accurate. These men were, quite literally, out of their minds on methamphetamine. A young German soldier named Heinrich Böll, who would later win the Nobel Prize for Literature, wrote letters home during this period. On November 9, 1939, while fighting in occupied Poland, he wrote to his parents back in Cologne. "It's tough out here," he wrote, "and I hope you will understand if I'm only able to write to you once every 2 to 4 days soon. Today I'm writing you mainly to ask for some Pervitin." By May 20th, 1940, during the invasion of France, Böll was begging. "Perhaps you could obtain some more Pervitin for my supplies," he wrote. The pills seemed to him like coffee, keeping him alert. He added that it made miracles. By July 19th, 1940, his desperation was clear. "If at all possible, please send me some more Pervitin." The future Nobel laureate was addicted to crystal meth, and he wasn't alone. The German advance continued with terrifying momentum. Brussels fell on May 17th. Antwerp fell on May 18th. The Allied forces retreated toward the coast at Dunkirk. Rather than face annihilation, they organized a desperate evacuation. Over 30,000 Allied soldiers were rescued from the beaches between May 26 and June 4, 1940, in what Churchill called a miracle. But it was a defeat nonetheless. The Germans pressed on. They turned south into France. A defensive front was established at the Somme and Aisne rivers, but it was futile. On June 14, 1940, just 5 weeks after the invasion began, German forces entered Paris. The city was handed over without a fight to preserve its historical structures. On June 22, 1940, France signed an armistice with Germany. To add insult to injury, Hitler ordered the signing to take place in the same railway car where Germany had signed its humiliating surrender at the end of World War I. The conquest of Western Europe was complete. 4 countries fell in 6 weeks. The German military had achieved what seemed impossible. They had rewritten the rules of warfare, and Pervitin had been their secret weapon, but the drug had a dark side. Reports of negative effects were already coming in during the French invasion. A lieutenant colonel with the Panzer Ersatz Division Y experienced severe heart pains after taking Pervitin 4 times daily for several weeks. The commander of the 12th Tank Division rushed to a military hospital after suffering a heart attack just 1 hour after taking a single pill. Several officers suffered fatal heart attacks while off duty. Soldiers who had been on too many missions, particularly Luftwaffe pilots, developed what was called Kanalkoller, channel madness. They were utterly burned out, suffering from what we would today recognize as severe stimulant psychosis. They had to be sent to sanatoria, essentially rehab clinics, though that term didn't exist at the time. Other side effects emerged: excessive sweating, dizziness, depression, aggression, hallucinations, paranoia, loss of concentration. Some soldiers, in the grip of psychotic episodes, shot themselves. Others, suffering from paranoid delusions, opened fire on their own comrades. Many died simply from exhaustion and heart failure, their bodies pushed far beyond human limits. One soldier from the 7th Panzer Division, Gerd Schmuckl, recalled his experience during fighting around Ziedemeyer in Ukraine in November 1943. "I could not sleep," he wrote. "During the attack I had taken too much Pervitin. We had all been dependent on it for a long time. Everyone swallowed the stuff, more frequently, and in greater doses. The pills seemed to remove the sense of agitation. I slid into a world of bright indifference. Danger lost its edge. One's own power seemed to increase. After the battle, one hovered in a strange state of intoxication, in which a deep need for sleep fought with a clear alertness. By late 1939 and early 1940, some German doctors were sounding alarm bells. Leonardo Conti, the Reich Health Führer, attempted to restrict Pervitin use. In a letter, he warned that an entire nation was becoming addicted to drugs. He wrote that the emergence of tolerance to Pervitin could paralyze whole sections of the population. Anyone who seeks to eliminate fatigue with Pervitin, he said, can be quite sure that it will lead to a creeping depletion of physical and psychological performance reserves and finally to a complete breakdown. In late 1939, Pervitin was made available by prescription only, but the restrictions were largely ignored. The military saw Pervitin as decisive for the outcome of the war. Civilian use, rather than decreasing, actually increased after people were warned of its dangers. By June 1941, Conti succeeded in having Pervitin classified as an intoxicant under the Reich opium law. It was now officially illegal, but the ban was hollow. In the military, the prohibition was totally ignored. In fact, consumption increased during Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union from June to December 1941. Soldiers simply got their Pervitin from medical officers. Those who ran out would write home, begging family members to send more. The black market flourished. Doctors continued selling it. Soldiers who became addicted found they couldn't function without it. Heinrich Boll's letters are testament to this. He needed the drug to ensure his physical performance, to maintain a state of euphoria despite the atrocities of war, to forget temporarily the horrors around him. The dependence was total. Withdrawal symptoms were brutal. Nausea, severe depression, anxiety, hallucinations, diminished cognitive capacity. Soldiers would experience what one anonymous military commander described in his post-war testimony. When the soldiers started laying in the snow to let themselves die, he said, "I decided to give them Pervitin." After half an hour, they spontaneously started getting up and were ready to march. But this was borrowing from a bank that always demanded repayment with interest. As 1941 turned to 1942, German military doctors began to realize the scale of the problem. Consumption of Pervitin declined sharply when the medical establishment formally acknowledged that methamphetamines were addictive. New guidelines were issued in June 1942. The instructions hadn't changed much. 2 tablets taken once would eliminate the need to sleep for 3 to 8 hours, and 2 doses of 2 tablets each were normally effective for 24 hours. But now there were warnings. Doctors were told that the regeneration phase after taking the drug was becoming increasingly long. The effect was gradually decreasing among frequent users. Soldiers going into battle on Pervitin usually found themselves unable to perform effectively for the next day or two, suffering from a drug hangover, looking more like zombies than warriors. But the war machine couldn't stop. Germany was now fighting on multiple fronts. The invasion of the Soviet Union had begun in June 1941, and it was here that the limitations of the drug-fueled strategy became painfully apparent. The harsh Russian winter, fierce Soviet resistance, and logistical nightmares exposed the Wehrmacht's dependence on methamphetamine. Soldiers who had been superhuman in France were now freezing in the snow, exhausted beyond recovery, their bodies depleted of every reserve. During the winter months, military doctors gave soldiers Pervitin to keep them from lying down in the snow to die. But the combination of methamphetamine and extreme cold was deadly. Soldiers didn't realize the danger. They wouldn't feel how cold they were. They wouldn't feel the frostbite setting in. They would fall asleep standing up and freeze to death. Yet the Nazi leadership, desperate and delusional, kept pushing for more. In March 1944, as the war turned increasingly against Germany, Vice Admiral Helmuth High requested something even more powerful. He wanted a drug that could keep soldiers ready for battle when they were asked to continue fighting beyond a period considered normal, while at the same time boosting their self-esteem. What he wanted was a Superman pill. Enter DX. Pharmacologist Gerhard Orzechowski and his research team in Kiel went to work. What they created was truly horrifying. Each D-Sykes tablet contained 5 milligrams of oxycodone, a powerful morphine-based painkiller, 5 milligrams of cocaine, and 3 milligrams of methamphetamine. It was a cocktail designed to redefine the limits of human endurance. And to test it, the Nazis turned to concentration camp prisoners. In November 1904, at the Sachsenhausen concentration camp, 15 kilometers north of Berlin, prisoners were subjected to D-Sykes experiments. They were forced to march in circles around the camp square, day after day, carrying 20-kilogram backpacks. At first, an eyewitness reported, the members of the punishment battalion whistled and sang songs, but most of them had collapsed after the first 24 hours. The tests showed that equipment-laden prisoners could march up to 90 kilometers, about 55 miles, without rest before collapsing. Nazi doctors were enthusiastic. They planned to supply all German troops with D-Sykes pills. But time ran out. The war ended before D-Sykes could be put into mass production. The though it did see limited use among crews of the Niger and Biber, Germany's smallest submarines, 1- or 2-man vessels with torpedo launching capabilities. The soldiers who manned these mini-submarines were given chewing gum containing methamphetamine and cocaine for their multi-day missions beneath the waves. It was a desperate, final gamble by a regime that had lost touch with reality. The drug use extended all the way to the top. While Hitler himself didn't use Pervitin, he had his own cocktail of substances administered by his personal physician, Dr. Theodor Morell. According to Morell's personal notes, he gave Hitler some 800 injections over the years. At first, these were relatively harmless, vitamins and glucose administered intravenously. Hitler became addicted to the daily ritual of injections. But as the war progressed and Germany's fortunes declined, Morell's concoctions became increasingly narcotic. Between autumn 1941 and late 1944, Hitler received hormone and steroid injections. Then came cocaine. Then came Eukodal, the German brand name for oxycodone, a pharmaceutical cousin of heroin. Hitler loved Eukodal. By 1944, when the military situation was catastrophic, Hitler used this powerful opioid to maintain euphoria, even when reality was anything but euphoric. The Führer, who had campaigned on purity and strength, who had condemned drug users as weak and degenerate, was himself a severe drug addict making critical military decisions while intoxicated. In the spring of 1945, shortly before Hitler committed suicide in his Berlin bunker, he was likely suffering from withdrawal. Morell was unable to find drugs in the devastated city. The man who had set out to conquer Europe with chemical enhancement was now trapped in an underground shelter, his body ravaged by years of drug abuse, his mind clouded by withdrawal and delusion. The story of Pervitin doesn't end with Germany's surrender in May 1945. After the war, the drug remained easily accessible in Germany. It was sold on the black market. Doctors prescribed it as an appetite suppressant and antidepressant. Medical students used it to stay awake while studying. Both East and West Germany continued to stockpile Pervitin for potential future conflicts. American units used it during the Vietnam War. The drug wasn't removed from German medical supplies until the 1970s and 1980s. It remained available by prescription in Germany until 1908. Even Konrad Adenauer, the first chancellor of West Germany, took it regularly in the 1960s. Today, methamphetamine is illegal in Germany and most of the world, but its legacy lives on in the form of crystal meth, a scourge that affects communities globally. The Nazi experiment with mass military drug use stands as a cautionary tale. In the short term, Pervitin gave German forces an undeniable edge. It allowed them to execute the impossible, to march when others would have collapsed, to fight when others would have surrendered. It helped them achieve victories that seem miraculous. The fall of France in 6 weeks, the rapid conquest of Poland, the stunning advances across Europe. But it was a deal with the devil. The drug that made soldiers superhuman in 1940 left them as hollow shells by 1945. Addiction destroyed entire units. Withdrawal symptoms rendered battalions combat ineffective. Heart attacks killed officers in their prime. Psychotic breaks led to friendly fire incidents. Strategic mistakes were made by leaders whose judgment was clouded by drugs. The broader lesson extends beyond the battlefield. The Nazi regime's use of Pervitin reveals something fundamental about totalitarian systems. They are willing to sacrifice everything, including the health and humanity of their own people, in pursuit of power. The same regime that sent drug addicts to concentration camps as social degenerates had no qualms about addicting its entire military to methamphetamine. The same leadership that preached racial purity and physical perfection had no hesitation in chemically altering the bodies and minds of the Aryan soldiers they claimed were already perfect. The hypocrisy was staggering, but it was also revealing. In the end, the Nazis' wonder drug couldn't overcome the fundamental weaknesses of their ideology and strategy. No amount of methamphetamine could compensate for Hitler's strategic blunders. No number of sleepless nights could make up for fighting a war on multiple fronts against superior forces. No chemical enhancement could substitute for the moral bankruptcy at the heart of the Nazi project. When French forces faced the German onslaught in 1940, they were told to drink red wine to boost their spirits. The Germans had Pervitin. That difference, in that moment, mattered. But wars aren't won by short-term chemical advantages. They're won by industrial capacity, strategic wisdom, moral clarity, and ultimately, by sustainability. The Wehrmacht's soldiers might have been able to march for days without sleep in 1940, but by 1945, they were stumbling zombies, broken by years of abuse, unable to function without their pills, unable to function with them. The drug that was supposed to create supermen instead revealed them to be all too human. Perhaps that's the most important lesson. There are no shortcuts to human excellence. There are no miracle pills that make us more than we are, without eventually demanding a terrible price. The Wehrmacht found that out in the snow outside Moscow. They found it out in the ruins of Berlin. They found it out in the bodies of young men like Heinrich Bull, who spent years trying to recover from addiction to a drug his government had given him, telling him it would make him a better soldier. The story of Pervitin is the story of World War II, told from an angle most history books ignore. It's a story about desperation and delusion, about the willingness of regimes to destroy their own people in pursuit of victory, about the hidden costs of warfare that don't appear on casualty lists. It's also a story about the enduring human desire for enhancement, for transcendence, for pushing beyond our natural limits. That desire hasn't gone away. Modern militaries still grapple with questions about performance-enhancing drugs. Caffeine is ubiquitous. Modafinil sees limited use. The ethical debates continue, but the Nazi experiment with methamphetamine stands as a stark warning. Some prices are too high to pay, even for victory. Some advantages aren't advantages at all, just borrowed time that must be repaid with interest. And some attempts to transcend human limitations end up revealing just how fragile we really are. The Wehrmacht learned that lesson in the hardest way possible. We would do well to remember it.